think I was probably like 15 when I first came to Jailhouse, and it was everything I could do to get up the warm-up. And I don't even think I red pointed it that day.
Think about the place you learned to climb, or you took your first road trip to. It may not have had the best rock or had the most history, but it probably holds a special place in your memory.
I came with my high school buddies, and we come down on the weekends and, over, winter break and that sort of thing. So it's like, was the local crag back then.
For a lot of California's best climbers, Jailhouse Rock is their first introduction to hard sport climbing, with dozens of steep, thuggy routes from 512 to 514. And yet, there's never been a guidebook. You don't see photos. Beta is totally word of mouth. That's because Jailhouse sat on private property.
At any point, it's their land. They could kick us off anytime they wanted.
For the last 2 decades, one man has spearheaded the efforts to keep this crag open. Meet local legend Tom Addison.
I'm kind of an old fart. I started climbing before sport climbing or trad climbing. It was all just climbing. It frightens me sometimes to think about how much of my life I've spent at this cliff. Actually, what really frightens me is how much of my life I spent hanging on a rope at this cliff. It felt like off-road.
Since he first started climbing here, Tom has been communicating with the landowners in order to preserve access.
He represented that there was a community, that there was more than just a few stragglers.
A few years ago, the Weinsteins decided that they were going to subdivide 200 acres of the property and sell them off. These new properties would cut off access to the cliff. Tom saw an opportunity, and he called the Access Fund in Boulder.
The guy at the Access Fund who really made the deal happen was Joe Sampataro.
I worked with Tom and the landowner about the new subdivision that was platted out for the approach. In the summer of 2010, the landowners were cash poor and land rich. They wanted to keep it as a 1,000-acre ranch land, but they were in a position where they needed to sell off some lots from that property. So it was very likely that we were going to lose access unless we took advantage of this opportunity to work with the landowner and establish permanent access to Jailhouse.
Back in Boulder, Joe went to work. This is where things get complicated. At Jailhouse, Tom and the local climbing community wanted to secure permanent access to the cliff. Meanwhile, the landowners needed cash to make their subdevelopment happen. This is where the Access Fund comes in. They went to a key California climber, as well as the local climbing community, who helped finance the $100,000 Access Fund land conservation campaign loan to the Weinsteins, who would pay it back and then put an easement on the land, establishing permanent access to the cliff. Complicated, right? Thankfully, there's Joe and the Access Fund, who can help passionate climbers like Tom make conservation happen.
Jailhouse really depends on people like Tom who've been there for the last 20 years, climbing there and establishing a good relationship with the landowners. If he didn't establish that relationship, then we wouldn't have had the open door to talk with the landowners about conservation easements and tools to maintain climbing access.
After all of us are gone, that rock will still be there and there'll still be people climbing it. I like that a lot.
Our granddaughter, I could imagine her being a climber. She's real strong and kind of a little bit athletic. We'll have to point that out to her. She might like to try that.
Every climber needs their bouldering pad, their pair of shoes, but if we don't have a place to go use those, then what's the point of having that?
Access Fund at its core really depends on the network of volunteers and climbers out there.
It doesn't matter if you're a dirtbag. Skip the burrito at least one day a month and put that money towards the Access Fund. It's the only organization out there that is actively working for your interests.
These areas provide, our enjoyment, our fun, why we go out and go climbing. And, they're more important than your pad, they're more important than your shoes. And all of us need to make sure that, we keep them open for us and for the next generation.
Can you put a value on what climbing means to you? What your local climbing area is worth to you? Is it 10 cents a day, $1 a week, the cost of a six-pack, or a burrito once a month? For $35 a year, you can protect climbing areas on both public and private land across the U.S. Places like Jailhouse need you. So please, become a part of our community and join the Access Fund today.